All right, let's turn our attention now to today's news analysis. Now, has China come a long way since children were told they came from a garbage can? And do you recall that recent animated sex education series? Well, it doesn't sound like much, but it may be a start. Now, China is home to a largely conservative society, that is, compared to most, if not all, of its Western counterparts. And that appears to be true, especially when it comes to issues on birds and the bees. You know what I mean. Sex education is something many Chinese are unfamiliar with. But this was probably of fairly recent vintage because we've heard much about stories about China in centuries past. And there are several key reasons why. Now, the China Daily highlights one of today's dilemmas. The lack of sex education, especially concerning how to prevent abuse of young children, is in the spotlight. This following the release of a code of conduct at a primary school in Yangzhou, Jiangsu province. Now, the code tells pupils that body parts under shorts and underwear should never be touched by other people, and that you should tell bad people's secrets to teachers, and you can lie to bad people. Ignorance about sex may also be a factor. According to a national survey launched by a protection program for girls under the China Social Assistance Foundation, about 2/3 said they did not know what sex education was, while a fifth said they seemed to know. When asked how they would react if people tried to touch their private parts, a fourth said they would not know what to do or how to get help. About 44% said they would shout or scream. Now, the survey also interviewed over 900 parents of primary school students. 2/3 said they never gave any sex education to their children, and over half said they never showed their children how to prevent sex abuse. But some cities have taken the initiative. Now, since June last year, the Women's Federation in Guangzhou has distributed 70,000 brochures to teach primary and middle school girls how to protect themselves. You know what? No, ignorance is not bliss, especially on this issue. And the problem appears to be stuck in a vicious cycle since most parents admit they failed to provide their children proper sex education. But as the China Newsweek reports, even the type of formal sex education in China is flawed. China's sex education equates premarital sex to promiscuity, pregnancy, and sexually transmitted diseases. Well, that's one-sided and intimidating. And so the problem is young Chinese people find it difficult to get proper sex education from formal channels. Therefore, they turn to the internet. But that is dangerous because what is presented online is unregulated and confusing, not to mention tempting and deviant when it comes to pornographic sites. What the country's sex education should focus on is responsible sex, the proper use of contraceptives, and protecting self-esteem, among others. But self-esteem should not be linked to chastity. By self-esteem, we mean not just having sex to please your partner, and sex education should avoid saying that premarital sex would harm women. This would create confusion. The emphasis should be on the harm caused by unsafe sex. Then there's a third problem, and Sohu.com says it's an institutional one. There are rampant media reports that young Chinese people have contracted sexually transmitted diseases and AIDS. Yet the education sector has been slow to react. The reports have also failed to encourage more schools to take greater action by strengthening sex health education. This has led to sexual ignorance among China's youth, which has bred a sense of mystery and curiosity. Ironically, the media sometimes glamorize unsound sexual behavior to a highly impressionable youth. And finally, the Qilu Evening News describes how serious the problem is in China. A survey conducted by the Chinese Education Center shows that 3/4 of parents of high school students were at a loss at discussing sex with their children. And only a fifth of the students received sex education from so-called formal channels. The survey also shows that primary and secondary schools held separate sex education classes for boys and girls. The article says there was even a story about a teenage girl who felt depressed after viewing pornographic videos. A rehabilitation center counselor says that today's youth physically mature early, but are really naive psychologically. He says sex education must be provided by professionals whose approach is scientific and rational. You know what? It takes much, much more than personal wealth to truly be considered sophisticated.